The cold wind howled through the ruins, carrying the scent of ancient stone and forgotten history. Daniel Carter, a human researcher, adjusted the strap of his backpack and checked his scanner. The readings were weak, barely detecting anything. Yet his gut told him something was here, something important. This planet, Aldoria 7, was once home to an advanced alien civilization, but now it was nothing more than crumbling temples and shattered towers. As a scientist, Daniel had spent years studying lost civilizations, but tonight he wasn't alone. As he stepped forward, a sudden chill ran down his spine. Someone was watching him. He turned quickly, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. At first, he saw nothing but towering ruins. Then, from the shadows, she stepped forward. A woman, not human, but breathtaking in an unearthly way. Her long, silver hair glowed softly under the alien moonlight, and her luminescent eyes locked onto his. Her presence was elegant yet haunting, as if she didn't quite belong in this world. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to move, to speak, to do something, but he was frozen. She took slow, measured steps toward him, her gaze filled with a sorrow too deep for words. The ruins around them seemed to hold their breath as she stopped an arm's length away. Then she spoke. "It took me 300 years to find you." Her voice was like music, soft, yet heavy with meaning. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. 300 years. What did she mean? His mind raced. This had to be some kind of misunderstanding. A trick. A hallucination. Who are you?" he finally managed to ask. The woman's eyes softened, as if she had waited too long for this moment. "I am Silera," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And you are the one I lost." Daniel's breath hitched. That didn't make sense. He had never seen her before in his life. But then, why did his chest ache, as if something long forgotten was struggling to surface? Before he could ask another question, a sudden rumble shook the ruins. Dust and debris fell from the crumbling walls. Daniel instinctively grabbed Solera's arm, steadying her. She looked up sharply, her glowing eyes scanning the darkness beyond. Something was coming. "They found us," she murmured. "We must leave. Now." Daniel didn't know who they were, but the urgency in her voice sent a chill through his bones. And for reasons he didn't understand, he trusted her. With one last glance at the ruins, Daniel followed the woman who claimed to have searched for him for 300 years, not knowing that his life was about to change forever. To be continued. Daniel's heart pounded as he ran through the ruins, following Solera's swift movements. The ground trembled beneath them, and the distant roar of approaching ships sent a wave of fear through him. "Who's coming?" he asked, breathless. Solera didn't stop. "The Varith Dominion. They were hunting me. And now, they will hunt you too." Daniel clenched his jaw. He still didn't understand what was happening. Moments ago, he had been a simple researcher exploring ancient ruins. Now, he was running for his life with a mysterious alien woman who claimed to have searched for him for 3 centuries. They'd reached the entrance of an old temple, its walls cracked and covered in strange glowing symbols. Solera pressed her hand against the stone, and a hidden door slid open. Without hesitation, she pulled him inside. As the door sealed behind them, Daniel gasped for air. The room was dark, but Solera raised her hand, and a soft blue light pulsed from her palm, illuminating the space. The walls were carved with intricate designs, stories of war, love, and loss. Daniel looked at her. "Tell me the truth. Who are you? And why do you think I'm someone you lost?" Solera stepped closer, her silver eyes filled with longing and pain. "You were once known as Orion Kale," she whispered, "a great warrior of the Ameri people. She hesitated, her voice breaking. "My bondmate." Daniel's stomach twisted. That name, Orion Kale, it meant nothing to him. He was just a human, a scientist, nothing more. "That's impossible," he said, shaking his head. I was born on Earth. I'm not some warrior. Celera's gaze softened. You were not born, Daniel. You were reborn. Daniel's mind spun. It was absurd. Reincarnation wasn't real. And yet, why did something inside him stir at her words? She stepped forward, gently touching his temple with her fingertips. A sudden warmth spread through his skull. And then, memories. Not clear ones, but flashes. A battlefield lit by crimson fire. A woman with silver eyes reaching for him. The sensation of falling, dying, and a promise whispered in the dark. I will find you again. Daniel stumbled back, gasping. The memories vanished, but the feeling remained. A deep, aching loss. Celera's expression was unreadable. You are him, Daniel. I know it. I have waited 300 years for you to return. He wanted to deny it, to tell her she was wrong. But in his heart, he knew. Something inside him remembered her. And outside the temple, the Vareth ships landed, their soldiers ready to claim their prize. The storm outside raged on, the deep hum of the Vareth ships growing louder. Inside the temple, Daniel stood still, his mind whirling. He couldn't understand it. He was Daniel Carter, a man from Earth. Yet, everything Celera said felt true. Orion Kale. The name echoed in his thoughts, like a memory trying to resurface, but just out of reach. Celera watched him carefully, her eyes filled with both hope and sadness. She stepped closer, her voice soft but steady. I know it is hard to believe, but the Ameri didn't die out. Some of us survived, waiting for the reincarnation of our greatest warriors to return. You were meant to come back. Daniel couldn't look at her. The idea of being someone else in another lifetime felt like a strange dream, too impossible to grasp. I don't remember any of this. Why me? Celera reached for his hand, her touch surprisingly warm despite her alien appearance. You were my bondmate, Daniel, the one who stood by my side in the greatest battle our people ever faced. You protected me. And I. Her voice faltered, and for a moment, she seemed lost in thought. I lost you. And now, I will not lose you again. Daniel's chest tightened at her words. A part of him wanted to believe her. A part of him wanted to feel that connection. The sense of familiarity that stirred deep within him. But another part of him clung to the life he knew, the reality he could touch. Tell me what happened, he said, his voice low, almost pleading. Why am I here now? Celera's face softened. She sat on the stone floor, her back against the cool wall of the temple. She gestured for Daniel to join her. Our enemies, the Vareth, are a ruthless race. They destroyed our homeworld, our people, and our future. In the final battle, we made a choice to send the souls of our greatest warriors into a deep slumber, hoping that when the time came, they would be reborn to fight once more. She paused, as if remembering the past. Her eyes glazed over for a moment before she continued. But the Vareth hunted us down. They hunted you, Daniel. They knew you were special. Daniel felt the weight of her words. And now they're after me again because of something I don't even remember. Celera nodded. Yes, they are relentless. But now, with you awakened, they will stop at nothing to capture you, to destroy what remains of the Ameri people. And if they get their hands on you, it will be the end of everything we've fought for. A chill ran down Daniel's spine. His whole life had been about exploring the unknown, studying ancient civilizations and finding answers. But none of that had prepared him for the truth sitting right in front of him. Celera stood up, her movements graceful and fluid. We don't have time to waste, Daniel. We need to leave this place before the Vareth find us. Daniel stood as well, still uncertain, but something deep within him began to stir, a sense of duty, of responsibility, to something bigger than himself. He looked at Celera, her glowing eyes filled with a fierce determination. I don't know how to fight, Celera. I don't even know who I am anymore. She smiled, her expression softening. You will learn. We will fight together. And for the first time since meeting her, Daniel didn't feel so alone. The sound of the Vareth ships echoed through the ruins as Solera led Daniel deeper into the temple's hidden passages. The walls seemed to close in on them, and Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. He had never imagined his life would come to this: alien battles, ancient secrets, and a past life that didn't make sense. Solera didn't speak much as they moved through the dark, only guiding him with quiet determination. Her face was set in a hard expression, but Daniel could see the fear hidden behind her calm demeanor. This wasn't just about saving herself anymore. She was protecting him. After what felt like an eternity of winding corridors, they finally reached a small, dimly lit chamber at the heart of the temple. The air was thick with dust, and the walls were covered in strange symbols that seemed to pulse faintly in the low light. Solera moved to the center of the room and gestured for Daniel to follow. "We need to activate the safe zone," she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's the only place the Vareth won't be able to track us." Daniel nodded, still trying to wrap his mind around everything. "And how do we activate it?" Solera placed her hand on a stone pedestal at the center of the room, and the symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, filling the space with an eerie blue light. There was a low hum as the ground beneath their feet began to shift, and a hidden door opened, revealing a small control panel built into the wall. She quickly worked the controls, her fingers moving with practiced ease. Daniel watched her, amazed at how effortlessly she knew what to do. It was as if she had done this 1,000 times before. "This will hide our presence from them," Solera explained. "The Vareth will be searching for us, but they won't find us here." Daniel didn't have much time to process her words. His thoughts kept drifting back to the earlier events. The Vareth. The name sent chills down his spine. From what Solera had told him, they were a brutal, merciless race, and now they were hunting him because of some ancient bond that tied him to her. The control panel beeped, and a holographic map appeared in the air between them. Solera traced a route on the map, her eyes scanning the path. "We need to get to the starport. It's the only way we can escape this planet," she said. "The Vareth are closing in, and we need to leave before they find this place." Daniel's heart raced. The idea of fleeing, of running away from whatever this unbelievable reality had become, was terrifying. But the look in Solera's eyes, the fear and desperation, made him realize that he didn't have a choice. He was now part of something much bigger than himself. As if on cue, a loud crash echoed through the hall. Daniel spun around, his pulse quickening. There was no time to waste. The Vareth were already here. "Move," Solera urged. "They're too close." They ran down the narrow corridor, the sound of boots echoing behind them. Daniel's mind raced. How had this all happened so quickly? One moment, he was studying the ruins alone, and now he was running from alien soldiers, with his whole life turned upside down. But as they reached the end of the hallway, he could hear it, the thumping of footsteps, the unmistakable sound of pursuit. They weren't alone anymore. The hallway stretched before them like a dark tunnel, and Daniel's heart raced as he followed Solera through the narrow passage. He could hear the Vareth soldiers getting closer, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls like a countdown to their capture. Solera's movements were swift, almost graceful, and Daniel struggled to keep up with her pace. "Hurry," she urged, her voice sharp with urgency. "We don't have much time." Daniel felt his breath catch in his chest. The intensity in her voice was enough to make him push his legs faster, but the reality of the situation weighed on him. He had never been in a fight like this. The closest thing to battle he had experienced was studying ancient ruins and artifacts. But this was real. This was dangerous. And for the first time in his life, Daniel realized that he wasn't just studying history, he was living it. As they rounded a corner, Solera stopped abruptly. Her body was tense, her glowing eyes scanning the area ahead. Daniel didn't need to ask why. He could feel it too, the presence of danger closing in on them. Celara turned to him, her face serious. "We can't outrun them. They'll catch us before we make it to the starport. We have to fight." Daniel swallowed hard. Fight. He wasn't prepared for this. He had no weapons, no training. He was just a researcher, a man from Earth. Before he could respond, the air was filled with a loud hum, and a crackling sound filled the space. A group of Vareth soldiers appeared at the far end of the hallway, their armored figures glowing faintly under the dim lights. They were taller than Daniel, with sharp features and cold, unfeeling eyes that made Daniel's skin crawl. "They'd found us," Celara whispered, her voice tight with determination. She stepped forward, placing herself between Daniel and the approaching soldiers. "Stay behind me," she commanded. Daniel hesitated, unsure of what he could do to help. But before he could voice his concern, Celara extended her hand toward the soldiers, and a brilliant blue light exploded from her palm, striking the first soldier in the chest. The force of the blast knocked him back, sending him crashing into the stone wall. Daniel watched in shock as Celara moved fluidly, her body shifting with unnatural speed. She was like a force of nature, fast, precise, and deadly. The remaining soldiers opened fire, their weapons charging with energy. Celara's eyes blazed with intensity as she summoned a shimmering shield that blocked the incoming blasts. The energy crackled and fizzled against her barrier, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she advanced, her movements a blur. Daniel stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing. He had never seen anything like this. Celara wasn't just fighting for her life. She was fighting for him. A deep, instinctual urge to protect her surged through him, and for the first time, he felt something awaken inside him. Something that was not human. He grabbed a fallen soldier's weapon, unsure of how to use it but desperate to help. The gun felt heavy in his hands, the cold metal unfamiliar. But as he aimed it at the oncoming soldiers, he felt a strange sense of clarity. His grip tightened around the handle, and he fired. The shot hit one of the Vareth soldiers square in the chest, sending him tumbling backward. The force of the impact stunned Daniel. He hadn't even aimed properly, but the shot had connected. Celara looked over her shoulder, a flash of surprise in her eyes. "You're stronger than I thought," she said, a rare smile tugging at her lips. Daniel didn't have time to respond. The fight wasn't over. The remaining soldiers advanced, their weapons charging again. Celara pushed forward, her shield shattering the next blast. But Daniel knew they couldn't keep fighting forever. "We have to go," Celara shouted, pulling him toward the exit. The soldiers were regrouping, preparing for their next assault. The time for hiding was over. It was time to fight or be caught. Daniel nodded, his heart pounding. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about standing beside Celara. And whatever it took, he wouldn't let her fight alone. The sound of footsteps echoed behind them as they sprinted through the temple's corridors. Daniel's chest burned with every step, but he couldn't afford to slow down. The Vareth were relentless, and they were getting closer. Celara, moving faster than Daniel had ever seen, led the way with a determination that made her almost seem untouchable. "We have to get to the starport," she said, her voice firm but urgent. "It's our only chance to escape. If we don't reach it soon, the Vareth will destroy everything we've built here." Daniel nodded, trying to keep up. The deeper they went into the temple, the more he realized how little he knew about Celara and the world she came from. All he knew now was that his life was tangled with hers in a way he couldn't explain. He had no idea what the future held, but right now, it felt as though the only thing that mattered was staying alive and protecting her. The path they followed twisted and turned, leading them through darkened chambers and narrow passageways. The walls seemed to close in on them, and the silence was broken only by their hurried footsteps and the distant hum of the approaching Vareth. "We're almost there," Celara whispered, glancing back at Daniel. "The starport is just ahead, hidden in the heart of the ruins. But once we get inside, we have to act fast." Daniel's thoughts raced as they neared a large metal door, its surface covered in strange symbols. Solara moved swiftly to the door, placing her hand on an engraving that glowed faintly. A low rumble sounded, and the door slid open, revealing a massive hangar hidden beneath the ruins. The starport was unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. Massive ships floated in the air, their sleek metallic bodies reflecting the soft glow of the temple's lights. They looked like vessels of a forgotten age, older than anything on Earth, but also somehow more advanced. "This is it," Solara said, stepping forward. "We need to get to the last ship, the Talon Star. It's the only one capable of escaping the Varith's tracking systems." Daniel followed, his heart pounding in his chest. The weight of their situation settled in. This wasn't just about escaping a planet anymore. This was about survival, the survival of an entire people. But before they could reach the ship, a loud clatter rang out. Daniel spun around to see a group of Varith soldiers entering the hangar, their weapons raised and ready. They had found them. "No," Solara shouted. "We can't let them take us." She stepped forward, her body shifting as she summoned an energy shield in front of her. The soldiers fired, but the blasts bounced off her shield, leaving sparks in the air. Daniel's heart raced as he looked at her. She was incredible. Her strength, her power, but he knew she couldn't fight forever. He glanced at the ship. It was their only chance. Without thinking, Daniel ran toward the Talon Star, his feet pounding against the metal floor. Behind him, Solara was holding the line, but Daniel could hear the Varith closing in. Every second mattered. He reached the ship's door and quickly slammed his hand on a panel next to it. The doors opened with a hiss, revealing the sleek interior of the ship. "Get inside," Daniel shouted over his shoulder, hoping Solara could hear him. The sounds of battle grew louder, but before the Varith could reach him, Solara burst through the door and ran inside. She locked the door behind her just as the soldiers reached the hangar entrance. "Go," she said urgently, her voice full of command. "We can't wait any longer." Daniel wasted no time. He rushed to the cockpit and began activating the controls, his fingers moving quickly over the unfamiliar interface. His mind raced, but there was one thing that stood out above everything else. He had to protect Solara. He wasn't sure why, but he knew this was his purpose now. The ship's engines roared to life as they lifted off the ground, soaring into the night sky. But as they ascended, Daniel looked down at the burning ruins below. They had barely escaped, but this was only the beginning. The Varith wouldn't stop. They never did. And somewhere deep inside, Daniel felt something stir, a power that had been dormant for too long. The battle wasn't over yet. The Talon Star soared through the atmosphere, the planet below rapidly shrinking into the distance. Daniel's hands gripped the controls as he steered the ship into the unknown. Solara sat beside him, her eyes focused on the view screen, scanning the sky for any sign of pursuit. The stars ahead seemed so peaceful, so far removed from the chaos they had just escaped. Yet Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that the danger wasn't over, not by a long shot. As they entered the vastness of space, a heavy silence filled the cockpit. The only sound was the hum of the ship's engines and the occasional beep from the control panel. Daniel's mind was racing. Everything had changed in the blink of an eye. He had been a simple researcher, studying ruins and ancient civilizations, and now he was fleeing from an alien race with a woman who claimed he was someone else, a warrior who had lived and died centuries ago. Solara broke the silence, her voice low and steady. "You're probably wondering why the Varith are hunting you, why they've been chasing us." She didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on the stars outside. "I didn't want to overwhelm you, but now that we're away from the planet, I think it's time you know everything." Daniel glanced at her. "I want to understand. Tell me everything." Solara's expression softened as she began. "Long ago, the Almeri were a peaceful race, living in harmony with the universe. We were deeply connected to the stars, to the energy that flows between all living things. But the Varith, they didn't understand that. They saw us as weak, and they wanted to conquer us, to steal our power. Daniel listened closely, trying to keep up with the details. It felt like hearing an old story, something from a dream, but the seriousness in Solera's voice made it clear this was real. We fought back, of course, but the Varith were ruthless. They destroyed our world, killed our people, and left us scattered across the galaxy. The last of us tried to find a way to preserve our civilization. That's when we came up with the plan to save our greatest warriors. Daniel frowned. You mean me? Solera nodded, her eyes soft with emotion. Yes, you were one of those warriors. We sent your essence into deep stasis, hoping you would be reborn when the time was right, when you could help us fight back. But the Varith knew of our plan. They hunted us down one by one, killing anyone who stood in their way. She paused, her voice tight. And then you died. You sacrificed yourself for me, and I thought I would never see you again. Daniel's chest tightened as he tried to make sense of her words. This wasn't just some alien war. This was his war, a war he had fought in before, and a war that had cost him his life. But now, with Solera beside him, he couldn't deny the connection he felt to her, the deep bond that seemed to span both time and space. I don't remember any of it, Daniel said softly, his voice full of uncertainty. I don't even know who I was, who I am now. Solera's gaze softened. The memories will come back in time. You've always been a warrior, Daniel, even if you don't feel like one yet. But your true strength, it's not in your fighting skills. It's in your heart. The same heart that protected me centuries ago. Daniel looked at her, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. It wasn't about who he had been. It was about who he was now, and the choices he made. Solera was right. He was more than just a researcher, more than just a man from Earth. He was part of something much bigger. As the stars outside the window streaked by, Daniel felt a new resolve settle in. They weren't just running anymore. They were fighting back. Together. We're not alone in this, he said, his voice firm with new determination. We'll stop them. Together. Solera smiled, her eyes glowing with gratitude. I knew you would say that. And as the Talon star hurtled deeper into space, Daniel knew their journey was far from over. They still had much to face, and the Varith wouldn't be easy to defeat. But for the first time, Daniel felt like he wasn't just an observer in the story. He was the hero. And Solera, she was right beside him. Always. The stars outside the Talon star glowed softly, but inside the cockpit, the tension was palpable. The ship was now drifting in the vastness of space, far from Eldoria 7, but the danger was far from over. Daniel's hands rested on the control panel, his mind constantly scanning the readouts, trying to make sense of what was coming next. The Varith Dominion had not forgotten about them. They wouldn't stop hunting them until they were destroyed. Solera was silent beside him, her eyes fixed on the stars ahead. For a moment, she seemed lost in thought, as if preparing for something inevitable. Daniel couldn't help but notice the sadness in her gaze. Was she ready for this fight? Or was she just doing what she had to do because there was no other choice? Finally, Solera spoke, breaking the silence. The Varith are closer than we thought. They've been tracking our every move since we left Eldoria 7. She paused and looked at Daniel, her face filled with determination. We can't keep running. We have to face them now, or they'll keep coming until they destroy us all. Daniel nodded. He didn't know what had become of him in his past life as Orion Kale, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't hide anymore. If he was going to fight, it had to be now. We'll need a plan, Daniel said, his voice steady, but his mind racing. Do we have a way to fight back? A weapon or something? Solera didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned and moved to a compartment near the back of the cockpit. She returned with a sleek, glowing weapon. Something alien, yet familiar. This is a pulse blade, she explained, holding it out to him. It's a weapon that channels energy from the stars. It can cut through almost anything, including Varith armor. She handed it to him. But it's not just about the weapon. It's about how you fight. The strength comes from within. Daniel took the blade, feeling its hum against his palm. He had never used anything like this before, but as his fingers wrapped around the hilt, something inside him shifted. It wasn't just the weapon that felt right. It was the purpose. He wasn't just a man from Earth anymore. He was a warrior, part of something bigger. Suddenly, the ship's alert system went off. Multiple ships were closing in on their position. The Varith fleet had arrived. The fight was no longer an option. It was a necessity. "They're here," Solera said, her voice calm despite the impending threat. "We have to take them head on. Prepare yourself, Daniel. This will be the hardest fight of our lives." Daniel's heart raced, but the fear that had gripped him earlier began to fade. There was a sense of clarity now, something that hadn't been there before. He wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. He was fighting for something worth protecting. The Varith fleet emerged from the darkness of space, their massive ships lined up like an unstoppable wave. Solera quickly engaged the ship's defenses, but Daniel knew it wouldn't be enough to hold them off for long. "We need to get to their leader's ship," Solera said urgently. "If we can take them down from the inside, we can end this." Daniel's grip on the pulse blade tightened. "Let's do it." They flew towards the heart of the enemy fleet, dodging energy blasts and enemy ships. The Talon Star shook under the force of the attacks, but Daniel kept his eyes forward. He had a new sense of purpose now. It wasn't just about survival, it was about winning. As they approached the Varith flagship, Solera activated the cloaking device, and the ship disappeared from the enemy sensors. It was their moment. They had to strike before the fleet realized they were there. "Ready?" Solera asked, looking at Daniel. Daniel nodded. "Always." And with that, they dove straight into the heart of the enemy fleet, prepared to fight to the very end. The Talon Star shot through space, its engines humming as it weaved through the Varith fleet. The massive enemy ships surrounded them, their energy weapons charging, ready to strike. But Daniel wasn't afraid anymore. The fear that had once gripped him had been replaced with something else. Purpose. He wasn't just a human anymore. He was a warrior, and he was fighting for something bigger than himself. Beside him, Solera's eyes glowed with the same fierce determination. She was a force of nature, guiding the ship through a storm of enemy fire. The Varith didn't know what was coming for them. They didn't know that two warriors had set their sights on taking them down. Together, they would end this war. Solera's voice came through the comms, calm and steady. "We're almost there. Get ready." Daniel gripped the pulse blade tightly, his muscles tensed, and his focus sharp. The closer they got to the Varith flagship, the more he could feel something deep within him stir, something he couldn't explain. Was it the memories of his past life, or was it just the bond he shared with Solera, pulling him forward, urging him to fight? The flagship loomed ahead, a massive black shape against the stars. Its weapons charged, and Daniel knew they didn't have much time before the Varith realized what they were planning. The cloaking device would only last so long, and once they were detected, it would be a battle to the death. "Brace yourself," Solera shouted, slamming the controls forward. The ship plunged toward the enemy flagship, and Daniel felt a rush of adrenaline. The stars outside blurred as they neared their target, the enemy ships moving to intercept them. But before they could get close enough, the Talon Star emerged from the cloak, and a torrent of enemy fire lit up the space around them. Explosions rocked the ship, but Solera's hands were steady as she dodged and weaved, keeping the ship intact. "We're in," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "Now we take the fight to them." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. They had reached the flagship's docking bay, and the ship shuddered as Solera expertly maneuvered the Talon Star into position. Without a second thought, Daniel grabbed the pulse blade, his body already moving toward the exit. The ship's hatch opened with a hiss, and they stepped out into the enemy's stronghold. The corridors were dark, lined with cold metal and alien symbols. It was a far cry from the warmth of their ship, But the mission was clear. They weren't just here to survive. They were here to end this. As they moved through the halls, the sound of footsteps echoed around them. They weren't alone. The Varith had already sent their soldiers, and they were coming for them. "We need to find their leader," Celera said, her eyes narrowing. "If we take him out, the rest of the fleet will fall." Daniel nodded. He could feel the weight of the decision. The future of their people, the fate of the galaxy, rested in their hands. But with Celera beside him, he knew he wasn't alone. They were in this together. They reached the heart of the flagship, a massive chamber filled with Varith soldiers. The air crackled with tension. The soldiers raised their weapons, but before they could fire, Daniel and Celera struck. Daniel moved with speed and precision, the pulse blade cutting through the enemy with ease. His past life as a warrior had awakened, and with every strike, he felt stronger. Celera's attacks were just as deadly, her movements fluid and graceful, an extension of the energy that flowed through her. They fought side by side, unstoppable. But as the last of the soldiers fell, Daniel turned to face Celera, his chest heaving with exertion. "We're not done yet." "The leader." Celera nodded, her eyes filled with fierce determination. "He's just ahead. Let's finish this." With one final surge of energy, they charged forward, ready to take on whatever came next. The air inside the Varith flagship's command center was thick with tension. The sounds of battle had faded, leaving a heavy silence as Daniel and Celera stepped forward, their pulse blades at the ready. The last of the Varith soldiers had fallen. And now they faced their final challenge. Their target was just ahead. The Varith supreme leader, the mastermind behind the destruction of Celera's people, and the one who had hunted them relentlessly. The door to the inner chamber slid open with a low hiss, revealing a large cold room bathed in dim, flickering lights. At the center, seated on a throne of jagged metal, was the supreme leader. His appearance was imposing, tall, with pale, angular features, and dark, cold eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. His expression didn't change when he saw them enter. "You think you can defeat me?" The supreme leader's voice echoed through the chamber, deep and menacing. "I have crushed entire worlds. You are nothing." Celera's grip tightened on her pulse blade, but Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady. "You're wrong. We're not nothing. We're the end of your reign. You're finished." The Varith leader chuckled darkly, his eyes flashing with a cruel amusement. "You think you can stop me? You've seen what I've done. I've burned your world to ashes. Your people are dead. You are nothing more than ghosts." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. The pain of hearing those words stung deep, the loss of her people, the destruction of everything she had known. But in that moment, something inside him clicked. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for her, for the future they could build together. They weren't ghosts, they were fighters. And together, they were unstoppable. "We're more than ghosts," Daniel said, his voice growing stronger. "We're a force, and we're going to stop you." Celera stepped beside him, her eyes glowing with the same fierce determination that had guided them from the very beginning. "You've taken everything from me, but you won't take us. Not now, not ever." The supreme leader stood, his imposing figure casting a shadow over them. He raised a hand, and the walls around them shuddered. "You think you can fight me, human?" Before he could move, Celera raised her hand. A brilliant blue energy pulsed from her, enveloping the room in a bright, blinding light. The supreme leader staggered back, momentarily disoriented, but Daniel was already moving. He charged forward, his pulse blade glowing brightly in his hand. The energy around him seemed to surge, guiding his movements. His past life as Orion Kale awakened fully, and in that instant, he was more than just a man from Earth. He was the warrior he had once been, fighting with purpose, with passion, and with the woman who had found him after centuries of searching. Celera was right behind him, her blade cutting through the air with deadly precision. Together, they closed the gap between them and the Varith Supreme Leader. He swung at them, his energy blade flashing in the dim light, but they were faster, more focused. Every strike, every move, was in sync, like they had fought side by side for centuries. With a final, powerful blow, Daniel drove his pulse blade into the Supreme Leader's chest. The room shook as the energy from the blade coursed through the leader, his body convulsing before collapsing to the ground in defeat. The silence that followed was deafening. The Varith fleet had fallen, and their leader was no more. The war was over. Daniel stood over the fallen body of the Supreme Leader, breathing heavily, but he couldn't help but glance at Celera. Her eyes met his, and in that moment, he knew everything had changed. They had won, but more than that, they had forged a new bond, one that was unbreakable, forged not just in battle, but in love and hope. "We did it," Celera whispered, her voice filled with both relief and wonder. Daniel smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in days. "We did it, together." They stood in the wreckage of the Varith Command Center, surrounded by the quiet aftermath of the battle. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: their journey was far from over. Together, they would face whatever came next. And this time, they would face it as equals. No more running, no more fighting alone. As the stars outside the window beckoned, Daniel and Celera knew that a new chapter had begun. A chapter of hope, of rebuilding, and of a future they would create together.